Welcome to episode 24 of Eagle's Tech Talks podcast. Today we're going to be tech talking about management consulting. My guest is a 40-year veteran of the IT industry and was a founder of his very own consultancy company, Corvelle Consulting, over 25 years ago. Stay tuned for my conversation with Yogi Schultz.
You're listening to Eagle Tech Talks, where we talk tech with today's top tech talkers. Here's your host, Morley Sircon.
Management consulting can include components of business strategy, leadership, program and project leadership, best practice approaches, organizational change, cybersecurity, and just about every other aspect of IT that we've spoken about in this podcast series to date. Companies hire management consultants for a specific area of expertise that they bring and/or to engage a non-biased outside viewpoint. And the main goal or purpose is to improve the organization's performance. Given this, it's a high-level strategic engagement where stakeholders often include members of the C-suite. Management consultants tackle big problems and need to be able to work with people with big responsibilities and oftentimes the egos to match. My guest is Yogi Schultz. Yogi is a career consultant and industry bellwether. He is an active freelance contributor to some of Canada's most well-read industry publications and journals, such as IT World Canada. Having provided consulting services to industry and governments alike, Yogi has developed and perfected a management consulting approach that has been proven time and time again. We are so fortunate to have Yogi join us today to share his knowledge of management consulting. Here's my interview with him now. Welcome everyone to Eagle Tech Talks. Today we'll be discussing IT management consulting with industry veteran Yogi Schultz. A founding partner in a Calgary-based IT advisory institution, Corvelle Consulting, Yogi has decades of experience delivering projects and IT management consulting to some of the largest organizations in Canada's energy sector. Yogi is recognized as an IT industry thought leader, having presented at many conferences, and he has contributed his written works to the likes of itworldcanada.com, the Microsoft website, and Computing Canada. He's taught several courses for the University of Calgary's Faculty of Management in their Management Development Certificate program, and Yogi's experience in IT management consulting is rich and well-earned, and I'm so pleased that he's agreed to share some of his knowledge with us here today. Yogi, welcome to Tech Talk.
Well, thank you, Morley. It's great to be here. I hope we can make this interesting and useful to the Eagle community.
I'm sure it'll go swimmingly well. So, Yogi, before we hop into the details of management consulting specifically, tell me a little bit about you and your journey to become a management consultant and what's driven your passion for this profession.
Yeah, you wonder how certain paths in life actually start. Somehow I developed an interest in computers way back in high school, and there was really no way to do anything about that because there were no computers on anybody's desk. But then when I arrived at the University of Calgary, there was a chance to enroll in some computer-oriented courses as electives in my Bachelor of Commerce degree program. So I did that. And like everybody at that time, I worked on mainframes with punch cards. And then along came mini computers and started to learn more and more about what programming and computers were all about and their opportunities to add value for companies, which is why they were making an investment in that. And then after university, a friend of mine and I hung out our shingle as software developers. Now, many of you are probably rolling your eyes. That sounds totally ridiculous. And indeed it was. But somehow we managed to strap ourselves into a little consulting business. And that went on for several years. And then my partner went off to Saudi Arabia with his family. And I looked around for new adventures and eventually joined DMR Group. I don't know if you know them. They were the predecessor of Fujitsu that you know here in Calgary. And I very quickly learned that there was a lot I didn't know about management consulting and project management. And at DMR, I learned a lot more. After 5 years there, I again hung out my own shingle. This time, as you mentioned, I started Corvelle Consulting. That was in 1995. Over the decades, I've worked with multiple partners and associates, and we've worked on many projects for lots of oil and gas producers. That's the synopsis of the journey, Morley.
Excellent. So, what is it that sort of drove you in that direction? What fired your passion about it? Was it a mixture of taking your commerce part and being able to tie it to the technical part, or did you sort of, stumble into it and evolve into the position?
Well, we certainly stumbled into it, but I certainly recognize that the techies are too techie and the business people are business people, and there weren't a lot of people around who could straddle that, and that seemed to help us. But you talk about passions. I think it's about being able to solve significant problems for our clients, especially solving those problems that have defeated somebody or some team before we got into the mix, and that was always incredibly fascinating. Being the second project manager or a consultant on an opportunity is a lot easier to deliver a success. Everybody knows most of what doesn't work because they tried that. The stakeholders now understand the project isn't that easy because they just failed. Certainly not as easy as they may have thought some years earlier. And the money and the lapse time that's already invested have reduced the client's expectations about what's feasible down to a manageable level so you can be successful. I remember meeting with a vice president, and she said, I'm spending $50,000 a month on this project. It's been 6 months since I've been able to observe anything that I can recognize as progress, not being an IT professional. So I think we have a problem. However, I need this project, and I need the deliverables, and I need it finished. So go figure out what's wrong and fix it, because I don't know.
Right. So Yogi, what does a management consultant do exactly, and what does it mean to use a consultative approach?
Okay. Well, as a one-liner, management consultants lead solving business problems. Now, some of you may say, well, that's very high level, that's very vague, that doesn't really tell me anything. So let's drill into that a little bit. Management consultants, they analyze issues, diagnose problems, propose interventions, and execute those to solve the problem. So management consultants have to be strategic thinkers. They help leaders and teams decide what success actually looks like. And they often have a process improvement mindset. A lot of the times when you get into a problem, it's all about bad processes. And you lead an effort to achieve whatever the agreed strategy is. And so some consultants believe they walk on water. Sometimes they're even arrogant and egotistical. In our experience, none of that is helpful to maintain good client relations. I remember having a meeting with the manager of application development at an oil producer. He said, I think we have a problem that's going around in circles and not making any headway. The vice president and I continue to be enthusiastic about this project, and we'd like it to come to a successful conclusion. So go figure out what's wrong and quit moving around in circles, move the project towards a goal line. So you asked about the consultative approach. Mm-hmm. I think consultative approach means first and foremost to listen carefully, and that often involves biting your lip. Just be quiet and listen. And a surprisingly simple rule that we figured out somewhere along the line is never interrupt the client. Give him a chance to finish. Get off his chest whatever it is he wants to explain, which is typically what they're trying to achieve, how they're progressing or not, and perhaps why they're reaching out for a consultant. Almost always what the client says is the problem is not the problem. It's actually a symptom of the real problem. Another common problem that interferes with the consultative approach is something called solutionism. That's when the proposed solution is adopted before the problem analysis is complete. And the reason for doing that is you hope to implement the solution faster and cheaper. That's very dangerous and leads to a lot of fiascos.
Okay. So when companies typically reach out to engage with you, is it when they've already, got a problem and they need you to fix it, or is it to take advantage of some new approach or strategy or technology, or is it when things are stable and they want to build a workable plan for the future? What's been your experience?
A of the three. When there is a crisis, when a change is necessary, and you're not going to get to the goal line without a consultant, and your efforts to duck or bob and weave and solve the problem some other way have all failed. So when the oil price is low, or there are significant events like Y2K or the internet implosion, no one can afford or wants to introduce change. That's when consultants starve, when it's stable. However, companies reach out for a consultant when they know they don't have the needed expertise in-house, they don't have the capacity, the project sometimes is seen as risky or too risky by internal staff. So they're all running away and hiding behind the photocopier. They don't want to have anything to do with this project. And then the management really has no choice except to hire the consultant, if only to take the blame if the project goes south. Now, you asked, is it when they have a problem? Yes, almost always. A significant problem is the trigger to reach out and hire a consultant. Or are they trying to, you asked about whether they're trying to take advantage of an approach or a strategy or a technology. Sometimes companies are that proactive, but it's not too often. Mostly they're reactive to some long festering problem that can't be ignored any longer. So, but on the other hand, like during the pandemic, we might as well throw that in, the world really has changed. We need all of a sudden contact tracing systems. Who ever heard of those last year? It's a whole new thing. And we need massive scheduling and appointment management solutions to handle all the vaccinations that are coming up. Be interesting to know how many people are working day and night on those kinds of things. And I wonder if you can take a platform like Evite or Eventbrite or Meetup to schedule everybody for an appointment. I suspect those platforms can't scale that high, but who knows? So your other question about stable and building a plan for the future, I don't see that as much as it makes sense, which is why you're asking the question. Consultants are always hired when there's some kind of crisis or some massive change that's required. Now, for the consultant's point of view, it's a good thing that there isn't a lot of stability because we'd all starve. But so you may say, well, wait a minute, what are the things that are not stable? Well, mergers and acquisitions, regulatory change, growth, cybersecurity threats is a big deal now. New technology like the cloud or AI machine learning, e-commerce, blockchain, IIoT, all of these opportunities to use new technology are on the radar screen. And companies are trying to figure out how to use them, and often they need a consultant. It's interesting to observe how some companies are really stuck in their own processes, and they inhibit them from making the progress they'd like to make. And it's fascinating to observe that we were able to crash through all that in the midst of the pandemic. Millions of people all of a sudden went into work from home mode. And many organizations' IT infrastructure wasn't really in shape to support that. It's astonishing how many IT organizations made that shift. So often you need an external event that gets you moving. Like at BP, when they had that well blow up in the Gulf of Mexico, that was an incredible shock to their organization. But they responded to it. And good for them, because they had a big problem on their hands. So it shows you that we can be more agile, because we know we like to throw that word around a lot. And we can be more effective, but certain forces get in the way. So
typically when they're reaching out to you, though, it's usually when they have a problem. So you're stepping in when passions are high and frustrations are high, and there's a certain amount of elevated risk as part of the project or program or whatever the situation that you're brought into.
Yeah, and on one hand that's scary. On the other hand, that can be exciting. For us, it's usually exciting because we're solving a problem other people can't get around to solving or have failed to solve or misunderstand. We've been in many client situations where the customer will say, I think I have problem A. And then you do a little upfront analysis and you go, yeah, that's maybe you have some issues around that, but really your big problem is B. And sometimes management doesn't want to hear that or doesn't understand or needs to be convinced. And that's where I think management consultants earn their money or produce the value that causes people to keep hiring them.
Sure. So Yogi, as a consultant, who are your stakeholders, and what is it that they expect from you?
Most often, or hopefully, the stakeholder is led by a senior executive of some kind who's got a problem. The lower down the organization that you're being invited to work, the less likely you will be successful. So as a consultant, that's a huge risk factor. If there's some proactive lower level middle manager person who's, kudos to that person, trying to solve a problem, but they're not in a position to get the organizational momentum or approval or consensus to actually move forward. So to us, the stakeholder is the senior executive, that person's direct reports, and often somebody on the IT leadership team. And I mention that because in the 21st century, there's always a big systems element in a project. Like, we have adopted computing technology so pervasively, there are very few problems you can solve without a dose of IT some way, somehow. So the issue with that list of consultants, that list of stakeholders, is that they all have a different perception of what the problem is. There is no consensus. Some people have a very tactical view. Some people have a high-level view. Some people have a conceptual view. Some people have the wrong view. And then I think the role of the consultant is to act as the facilitator and the analyst to help the organization come to a consensus on that. So I think you've heard the phrase herding cats. That was introduced by a brilliant commercial many decades ago that EDS put together. And yeah, good for them. And I think that's an accurate depiction. So again, I think this business of herding cats is where management consultants really help.
Okay. Now, you'd mentioned in the past, earlier in the conversation, some of the challenges or the yellow flags that pop up. So maybe you could dive into that a little bit more. What are some of the biggest challenges that a management consultant will face, and how are these challenges overcome?
There's a bunch of issues that go wrong with these projects. If you think of any task, we talked about snow shoveling this morning, or brushing your teeth, or combing your hair, or repairing your car. There are always more ways to do it wrong and come out with an inadequate result than there are to do it right. So the same thing as the management consultant. So for example, you've heard the phrase analysis paralysis, where people keep wanting to analyze and analyze and analyze more. So solutionism is the reverse, where you don't do enough analysis and you jump to a conclusion. But organizations, at least bigger ones, struggle with analysis paralysis. They think they need to reduce the risk well beyond whatever they need to. And the other problem is, at some point, you're moving from analysis to speculation. that you claim is analysis but isn't. So I think part of our role as management consultants is to get people moving forward when analysis paralysis takes shape. The other thing is organizations sometimes struggle to make decisions to approve something. They like the end date, whatever the end date is. It's usually set by somebody who has no idea how much work there is, but they know they like the end date. So if you're going to make the end date in some way, shape, or form, you have to be decisive. So a lot of project managers get in the mode of what's called the assumptive approval. And I very much agree with this. If you have some issue, you need some vice president's agreement on something, you write up the issue, you send it to the vice president, and you may never hear from him. But you proceed on the basis that he or she will like the recommendation, and you keep moving. And people, when I first explained, they say, "What do you think you're doing? You're preempting the prerogatives of our vice president?" And I'm going, "Yeah. And also, you guys on the team are telling me that you're signed up for this recommendation. Is that true?" I mean, if they're not, then whatever the issue is, whatever the recommendation is wrong and needs to be changed. Usually everybody nods their head sagely and says, "Yeah, we like this recommendation." And if the vice president came into the room right now, you'd describe and defend that recommendation, right? They all nod and say yes. And then I say, "Fine, we're going with it." Because at the end of the day, you're going to be judged on whether you achieved schedule or not. That's really the only thing that people judge you on. On an IT project, it's very difficult to go over budget if you meet schedule, because it's all about people, 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 people. You know, you're not buying anything that's material. Like you're not buying a building, or you're not buying 10,000 miles of pipeline or whatever. Those are other kinds of projects. They're not IT projects. Sometimes what gets in the way is called veiled conflict, political jockeying that's going on in the background, which is happening, but nobody agrees that it's happening. Procurement process complexity. The procurement people have over-the-top elaborate processes for RFPs and, well, I guess you guys know that, don't you? You sometimes get hit with these
Absolutely.
giant RFPs. They're ridiculous. They're all about butt covering of the procurement people. They're not about actually helping the organization move forward, and they add a lot of cost. So there's that. And then you get understaffed IT departments that are supposed to work miracles. IT has become a big cost line item in many organizations. So for most of the year, all the vice presidents want more, because there's value. And at budget time, they want, I don't like the results of more, give me less. Well, that sets up the CIO for a really horrible, difficult situation. And you notice I haven't talked about technology in the list of problems. The information technology has matured to the point where it's rarely or never a risk factor in significant projects. If you've got technology risk in your project, then I got to question your choices of technology, or maybe you just haven't hired the right people.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny how that's changed over the years, where it used to be all about technology and covering the risks of implementation, doing that, and now everything is kind of settled, and now it's more the people and the process side of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm old enough that I ran significant mainframe software development projects with KICS and TSO. I don't know if anybody in the audience even understands those acronyms. And there was genuine technology risk in those things. No more. That's all gone.
Well, that's just as well. So, Yogi, how is success of an engagement measured? How do you know as a consultant if you succeeded?
Yeah. It's not obvious sometimes. Uh, One measure from a selfish point of view is you end up with a happy client who's willing to hire you again for something else. Now, you notice that statement made no reference to whatever the project charter said.
Right.
Sometimes, I mean, I'm really big on writing a project charter that's got a lot of detail in it as a basis for helping the organization form a consensus on what this project really is all about. And the flip side of that, what this project is not about.
Right.
What you get sometimes is the CIO tries to dump costs for other fiascos or operational costs into a project because he's desperate and doesn't have any other place to put it. Well, you know, that's just going to make you as the project manager or the management consultant look unsuccessful. So you got to be able to push back on that. So I'm big on having a project charter, but in the end, what's most likely to happen is you will not deliver all of the scope that's stated in the project charter. And that's usually okay because you've concluded the project reasonably on time and you haven't blown the budget. So everybody's still happy. The other one is don't make crazy commitments. Like that phrase, how hard can this be? You know, that phrase can really get you into trouble. So if some vice president is asking you to make a commitment around schedule or dollars, even before the project charter is written, and that happens regularly, you've got to figure out how to bob and weave and duck and say, we're not entirely sure. Well, I need a number for my budget. Okay, fine. Put in $1.5 million times the number of months that you think times the number of years that you think this is going to run. Now, you got to be very careful with that. That might be the best you can do at that time, but people tend to see that as arrogant or flippant when you tell them. So you got to be very careful with saying that, and maybe it doesn't. Right.
Yogi, on the scope side of the project charter, how elastic is that? Does that change quite a bit over the course of the engagement?
Depends. The Yogi Schultz view of that is it does not change, period. The reality is that all kinds of scope things are not understood at the beginning. So in some projects, you get quite a few proposed change orders. And most of those proposed change orders are really quite reasonable and helpful and meaningful. And what I do is I take those change orders and I stick them in a desk drawer. I don't discuss them with the steering committee. I don't do anything with them. They just sit there. And now sometimes a team gets excited about that. And I say the following. I say, look, I agree that we should do the work that's on these change orders. But if we don't come in reasonably on schedule and reasonably on budget, we're not going to have the political credibility to do any of this. So if you want to get this done, then the right answer is we do what we can between today and the scheduled end date. And then when everybody pats us on the back, gives us a bonus and a high five, then we say, okay, we've delivered a lot of value. You're obviously happy. Let's talk about the follow-on project. And if the project sponsor says, really, what do you have in mind? And that's the moment I pull out the change orders and say, here are the ideas that our team has come up with that merit your consideration. And if he says yes, you got another project. If he says no, then you're done. But what you haven't done is tried to jam any of those change orders into the current project and come in late and over budget. So even though you've delivered more, you're actually not appreciated for it.
Right.
So I know that what you just heard is not agreed to by many other people, and some of the theoreticians at PMI about how you do this would disagree vehemently, but I disagree with them.
In the real world, this is how it works.
I think so.
Good.
And you want to help the client, and you want to make sure that you don't get killed in terms of reputation.
Yeah. Well, as a consultant, your reputation is everything, right? That's what it comes down to.
You know, we're kind of talking about what success looks like. Another one is bragging rights. I know that's, you know, there are projects that we're very proud of, and talking about those, not too egotistically, but a little bit.
So if it's referenceable.
Yeah. References are important.
Mhm.
Another measure of success is that your invoice got paid, and that the project didn't get canceled early. If those things, the invoice doesn't get paid or the project is canceled early, that's called failure.
Yeah.
And
well, the things that you've described here are all kind of, you know, soft at the end of things, and how did it turn out? How do people feel? Did they pay you? Those kinds of things. I had a conversation where I asked the same question to an ITSM expert, and of course in IT service management, you know, it's all metrics driven, so it's very, very specific about, you know, how you you know, you can measure your success. Whereas on the management consulting side, it sounds like it's a little bit more softer.
Absolutely. And I would argue that in ITSM, where, as you say, you try for all those metrics, there are also softer things like, well, did we invest in our ITSM project because it doesn't seem to have changed our world as much as we wanted it to? Or did we overinvest and now we have processes that are so complicated that riots are breaking out? So, you know, so even there, where you're trying to be very data-driven and SLA-driven, which is all good. I'm not challenging that. There's this whole issue of perception.
Mm-hmm.
Did this work or didn't it work? At a very high level.
And that's the ultimate test. So just moving on here. So, you know, if a potential client comes to you, or one of Eagle's clients come to us, and, you know, they feel they have a need for a management consultant, what are the key questions to ask to really understand what it is that they require?
Well, our experience, the client always asks, have you ever worked with a client in our industry? Even before they explain the problem. And that's a very polite way of checking if the client is about to be paying the consultant to learn the industry that the client is in. Clients hate to pay you to learn their business. We figured that out a couple of decades ago, and we became oil and gas experts as a result. So we don't just pitch that we know information technology. We pitch that we understand all facets of the oil and gas industry. Now, we're not geologists, we're not financial accountants, we're not engineers, but we've worked with all of those disciplines very successfully, and we know what they do and why they exist and how they add value. So I think that's number one, that have you worked in our industry? That's one that comes up. The second question is, have you ever worked on this problem before somewhere? Do you have any relevant experience? So obviously the client is hoping to benefit from the experience and the learning that the consultant has accumulated. That's fine if whatever the problem is has been tackled before.
Sure.
But there are some issues that are new, like nobody's done it. Like if I go through your resume file there at Eagle and look for experience with contact tracing systems, how many hits am I going to get? I'm going to get 0, right? Whereas if I go for SAP or Oracle or .NET, I'm going to get a lot of hits. And we've done some of those projects where this is the first one on the planet. Like, let me give you one example. There's this piece of software called PALS, the production accounting system. Well, one day at Devon, the DVD shows up with the software. $30 million right there, one DVD. So Devon is the first company on the face of the earth to ever implement this. And my partner did that. It's a year and a half, couple of $1 million, great success. But that's not for the faint of heart. And there were lots of issues along the way. Where were we? Okay, so those are the two questions they also always ask.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes their expectations are totally unrealistic. Now, I'm sure you guys have run into this. Clients ask for 10 years of experience with something like data analytics or cloud or graph databases. Well, you know, those things haven't been around for 10 years. So somehow the clients, you have to be very diplomatic around the way you explain to the client that you can't fulfill that because it doesn't exist, not because you're lazy or don't do a good job on behalf of the client.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, the questions I like to ask are some scoping questions or some organizational performance questions, like how many people are going to be affected by this? Is it the entire organization? Is it one work group? Is it a department? Are any of your customers, i.e. external people, either customers or vendors, going to be affected by this? Is there a regulator involved? Is there a government organization that's looking over your shoulder because you've been a bad boy? You know, I don't phrase it that way, but that's really the question. So all is an effort to try to start to understand what's going on and, frankly, sound like you do understand and sound like you have some of the experience or some of the analytical capabilities to be the person they should hire and not some other Joe Schmo down the road.
Right.
We're obviously better than they are, which isn't always the case.
And tie up some of your past wins to the new problems that they're facing, and showing where the parallels would be.
Yeah. That's called selling yourself, right, Morley?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What about something like, you'd mentioned earlier that, often they're coming to you when there's a problem already, digging into the problems and trying to understand, have they tried this before and failed, or, are they ramping up to this and now they're nervous about it, or, any of these things. Are those good things to talk about?
You usually don't get a chance to talk about that in the first meeting because you're trying to sell yourself and appreciate the problem. And you don't want to put the client in the awkward position of having to describe the dirty laundry of the past. So some of that tends to trickle out in the first few months of the engagement. And you're walking in a little bit unaware of what you suspect that there's some dirty laundry, but you don't absolutely know what it is before you actually engage. Correct.
Interesting.
And I don't ask, because I think that undermines, then the client is embarrassed and he maybe wants to hire another consultant, which of course is called failure for me.
Right.
Yeah, but you do have to understand some of that failure or dirty laundry because you don't want to accidentally go down the same path that they've already crashed and burned in.
Right. Okay, well, in the same vein as that, what are some of the things that a management consulting should be watching out for, either good or bad, from a potential opportunity?
Crazy expectations in an RFP. And I'm sure you've seen some of that.
Right.
So it's gotten to the point where we have a rule at Corvelle: we don't respond to RFPs, like never. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's tempting in your business too, but that's probably not a good business plan.
It's impossible, especially with government business, right? The only way to do it is through RFPs.
Yeah, you mentioned government. We have a deliberate approach to only talk to private sector companies. Government organizations drive us crazy. However, if you look through our record, there are some government projects that we're very proud of, mm-hmm. that have worked very well, and we have been very successful. And in every one, there was no RFP. There was, an ADM or a CFO or a deputy minister or something, a phone call where they said, we understand you might be able to help us with this. Mm-hmm. And, you say yes, and then you try to figure out what he's really talking about, or she, and
Somebody else did you selling for you, or your reputation preceded you in that case.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So there was a case one day, the government of Saskatchewan phoned and said, we've been looking across the border and you guys did this project for Alberta Energy Regulator. We've been watching you in action for almost 3 years and you've done a great job on that. Everybody seems to be happy and you've solved the problem. It turns out we have exactly the same problem here in Saskatchewan. So can you fly over here and bring it on? We got to do it again. So that was cool. No marketing cost, no RFP response, and the ability to have another major project and another major satisfied client.
Yeah, and what it all comes down to in those particular cases is credibility.
Yeah, because in that example, Saskatchewan went, well, we're not touching that. We don't understand that thing, but it sounds like a nuclear bomb. And it took 3 years and $4 million to solve it in Alberta. So everybody knew this wasn't easy, simple, straightforward. It had some complexities to it. And it had huge stakeholders. Every oil company in the Yellow Pages in Alberta was a stakeholder, plus the government, plus the regulator. So, getting everybody on board, generally walking down the same path, that takes a lot of time, money, effort. And it was a lot simpler in Saskatchewan because most of the oil companies in Saskatchewan also operate in Alberta. So by the time you get to Saskatchewan, you don't have to re-explain it. They already understand it.
Sure. A lot of overlap there.
Liked it and some of them didn't, but even the ones that didn't like it, they knew, oh, well, it is what it is. We better get used to it.
So Yogi, what are some of the top hard and soft skills of a great management consulting? And is there something that defines a superstar in that space?
A superstar. Yeah. A superstar management consultant, to me, is someone who can work effectively with everyone in the client's organization, from the CEO all the way down to the summer intern, and obviously with all the VPs and the managers. And that's not easy. So the other thing is, a superstar management consultant knows enough about information technology to lead and collaborate with analysts, designers, software developers, without necessarily doing their job, but he knows enough not to be misled by them, either consciously, which is rare, or inadvertent, which is surprisingly often, where the software developers or the designers have confused themselves. But the point is, good luck finding that person. I'm not sure that that person actually exists, this superstar we're describing. More realistically, a good management consultant can communicate well with executives on their level. He can lead strategy development assignments, and who needs to be well supported by experienced technical people. That's probably a more realistic dynamic rather than the superstar who can walk on water and do everything. The other problem with, even if you are the superstar who can walk on water and do everything, a lot of the role of the management consultant is not on the keyboard. It's in meetings and encouraging or cajoling or communicating results and recommendations and proposed direction, and listening to people's concerns, which means, I don't agree with you. We want to do something different. And maybe you do, who knows? So vice president says to you, I'm not sure we're heading on the right road. That should be a giant red flag. As polite and as non-emotive as that statement is, that maybe there's something you're missing. Or maybe you're not missing anything and you need to convince him that he's wrong, which is not easy to do given the egos of most vice presidents.
So some change management that fits into that role.
Absolutely. We talked earlier about technology risk, and in IT, that technology risk has gone down, as we have said. But at the same time, what's gone up is the change management or the people change management risk. So every IT project now has to have a sizable component of people change management with it. And again, some project managers still have their technology blinders on. I got to implement this database, or I got to implement this interface, or I got to introduce this new language into the environment. Well, yes, you have to do all that, but if you don't understand the change management dimension, you can have a technical success and a project failure, which would be unfortunate.
Okay.
How do you do for time?
Well, I think we're doing fine. I've got a couple more questions, and we got about 15 more minutes, so I think we're doing well here. So getting on to the next question, is there a typical background or set of experiences that would prepare someone to become a management consultant? So, as part of our audience, is going to be people who are earlier in their IT career, who, is looking to move into IT, or someone who wants to take a pivot in their career. How does one kind of set themselves up to be a successful management consultant?
I think the first point is something called functional expertise and specialization. We've talked earlier about how we became experts at the oil and gas industry. So I think you need to make a decision about which industry or a very small list of industries you're going to become an expert at. And as we've discussed, for us, that was the upstream oil and gas industry. The second is about objective analysis and assessments. You have to build the skills as a business analyst, because that's part of what you do as a management consultant. So build some skills as a researcher. In the age of Google, research has become dramatically simpler and easier than it used to be. So you have to work hard to stay objective and logical. Sometimes it's tempting to, or in fact easy to latch onto a fad or a way everybody's doing it. I think that's dangerous. For me, this business of analysis was several years of working as a software developer and then as a business analyst early in my career, perhaps exactly like some of the people in the audience for our discussion here today, Morley. And then the third one we've touched on a bunch of times is project management. I think it's very difficult to be a management consultant without being a fairly senior, reasonably expert project manager. So you need to build those skills as well. So for me, that occurred when I graduated from analyst to team leader and then project manager, the classical IT career path. And I suspect some of your staff are in that. So I think those are the three main areas that people need to develop skills and experience in on the way to becoming a management consultant.
Now, you mentioned that you had gone through university through the business track. Is that important to have a good business foundation as well?
Well, I think somewhere along the line you need to make a personal decision of whether you're going to go on what I call the CTO track, Chief Technology Officer, or on the management consultant, maybe CIO track. And I'm not trying to suggest one is better or worse than the other. They're just different. So if you graduate with a Bachelor of Science in software development and you're enjoying that and you can make databases sing, or data centers perform better than anybody, and you're enjoying that, the market certainly needs that, you're on the technical track. On the other hand, if you're working with the business and you're doing the analysis and the project management and interacting with the VPs, then you're on the IT project manager, management consultant, CIO track. And so you get to make a personal decision about what you enjoy more and then pursue that.
Okay. So heading into the last question here, so, I guess we kind of talked a little bit about this just now, but, is there any other advice you'd give to somebody who wants to become a management consultant?
Yeah, I think somewhere along the line, you need to spend several years working for a major consulting company to learn what this is all about. Learn working on a team, learn about client management, learn about marketing. You notice none of those had anything to do with information technology.
Right.
And I think in this day and age, you want to think very seriously about pursuing the CMC designation, the Canadian Management Consulting designation. So check into that and put that on your professional development to-do list. And maybe PMI, maybe not. The PMP from PMI depends. I don't have that. Our daughter does, and I think it's going to help her in her career.
Sure. Well, you have scads and scads and scads of experience, so that probably trumps the PMI PMP kind of designation.
Thank you. That's my pitch. Who knows?
Yeah.
Seems
Excellent.
to work.
All right. Well, Yogi, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It's
Okay.
been absolutely fabulous having you here, and I appreciate all the work that you put into, being prepared for this as well.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been interesting. So I hope it's been valuable to our audience. It's been fun working with you on this, Morley.
Yes, it's been great to have you, and the information that you share has been fantastic. Thank you so much. It was just fantastic to be able to spend this time with Yogi. His experience really shone through. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. If you want to learn more about Yogi and how to reach him, visit our episode summary page at https://eagletechtalks.podbean.com. In this week's open discussion segment, I thought I would share some thoughts on whether working in a permanent IT job or becoming a contractor would be the better career choice. Many times, contractors, or rather those considering to become a contractor, have asked me whether being a permanent employee or a contractor is the best way to go. Well, as you might guess, there's no correct answer to this question, although there might be a correct answer for you. There's an industry saying regarding this that is most appropriate. Deciding on whether to be an employee or a contractor depends on which of two fallacies you wish to believe. That you will have more flexibility with your time as a contractor, or whether you'll have more job security as an employee. I know very few contractors who truly are able to take advantage of quote-unquote flexible time. Most that I know are working mad hours to try and accomplish timely deliverables and struggle with overlapping assignments. And likewise, job security for employers is a fallacy. Shakeups, reorganizations, changes in direction, or even the impact on the markets result in organizations making changes to their teams. Anyone can get caught up in unfortunate job action. So how do you choose? Well, there's some trends in the market worth considering, and depending on your situation or your aversion level to risk, they might push you one way or another. But my advice is, whatever you do, be decisive and communicate this to prospective employers clearly without waffling. Certainly, the world is heading towards what many are calling the gig economy, and this means strong demand for contingent workers. One of the traditional risks of being a contractor is having difficulty finding work and having too much downtime in between assignments. Well, given labor and skills shortages and growing acceptance of gig workers, if you have a decent skill set, this risk is much reduced, especially if you're flexible and mobile. It used to be the case that IT employers used to look at longevity at a company as a filter to recognizing a good quote-unquote company man or woman. Now, though, employers have the expectation that people will move around and in fact appreciate the value of having a broad experience that is gotten by having worked for multiple companies. I've witnessed fantastically talented people who, having been an employee for many, many years with the same company, struggle to find new work as their loyalty is actually viewed as a detriment to their resume. Now, this is especially true if they were not a specialist in their old jobs. Generalists are typically most sought after in times of contraction, when companies want one person to be able to do the jobs of 2 or 3 people, or for smaller companies who don't have the luxury of budget to employ a specialist. However, when things turn around or companies begin to grow, specialists are always preferred. This scenario is more true for contract roles than for permanent positions, but it's still true more often than not for both. In IT, one must always be learning and brushing up on their skills and education. One benefit to becoming an employee is that organizations will often invest in their employees to maintain or even grow their skills. In contrast, contract professionals are expected to make their own investments in themselves to keep up in the latest technologies and approaches. It is expected that contractors come to a new position ready to go and able to deliver. And in general, this is all true, but there is a caveat to consider. For employees, it may not be up to them to decide the nature of the training that the employer pays for. It typically needs to relate directly to the job that they're to do or the technologies that the company has invested in. Whereas for independent contractors, as they are footing the bill themselves, they can arrange to pivot and learn something absolutely new should they wish. Where they invest is completely up to them. One other trend I'd like to share impacts all people equally, whether they are contractors or employees, and that is hiring managers want to know what it is that they're hiring. If you are looking for a permanent job, market yourself as such. Tailor your resume to show that this is a focus for you and adapt it to the job description as much as possible. If you're a contractor, be sure to show the breadth of experience that you have working in your area of expertise. What you ought not to do is try to walk the line saying that you are interested in both contract and permanent employment equally. If you try to do this, your resume will read like neither a permanent employee nor a contractor. You'll be stuck in between and you'll struggle to get selected for an interview. Additionally, prospective employers may be concerned that an applicant may not be fully committed. On one hand, fearing that they might lose this person to a permanent position should one come up should they be hiring for a contract position. Or vice versa, they may fear losing a permanent hire to a contract once the market picks up again. It's important to make a decision about which way to go and build your resume and value proposition around that decision. The key to making the right choice of whether to seek permanent employment or become a contractor is to know thyself. Know what you really want from work in your career and design your education and your work experience to reflect your goals. That way your professional branding can be clear and on point. If you are clear on what you want and build your resume accordingly, companies will see that you know where you're headed and you'll be able to set yourself apart from these other lost souls that try to sell themselves as jack of all trades. Whichever direction you decide to go, do so with a plan and arm yourself with the knowledge and expectations needed to fit in and be successful. And that's a wrap on another Tech Talk episode. I'd like to thank Yogi Schultz for the time he spent preparing for our conversation. It's a real treat to speak with someone with such deep experience and who has so much real-world experience as Yogi does. Yogi is a consummate professional, and it really came through in today's podcast. In next week's podcast, I'll be tech talking about executive support with my guest, Kevin Chorapita. I hope you'll be able to join us. So until next time, be well, be safe, and I wish you success in whatever you define as important to you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Eagle Tech Talks. Don't forget to subscribe and review. Until next time.